Chapter 7. Introducing the very lovely, very talented Brenda. Brenda was born in Dayton, Ohio in 1939 at St. Elizabeth's, an open-door hospital run by the Franciscan Sisters. 40-odd years later, I wound up there one night after totaling my car and experienced a nose-related miracle. She was the elder of two sisters and Daddy's little girl. Art, his name was. He took her everywhere, including his favorite saloons where he'd sit around the bar while he drank. Art had been a singer in Chicago speakeasies during Prohibition and went by the name the Whispering Tenor. His wife Alice made him quit. Alice was the dominant figure in the family, and Brenda was scared of her. She did stuff like marking Brenda's periods on the calendar with an X. She was nice enough, but very controlled and severe. Art worked as the production manager for Newsweek in the McCall's printing plant. They were the largest printer in the United States, and they printed 60 or 70 titles in Dayton. As a kid, Brenda loved going with her dad to see the huge presses in action and smell the printer's ink in the air. When she was older, she even did paste up for the foreign edition of Newsweek, all of which nurtured her high school ambition to be a journalist. On graduation, she planned to go to college because she'd gotten a scholarship to Ohio Wesleyan. But her mother said no. Women didn't go to college unless they wanted to be teachers. She should have said, okay, I'll be a teacher, and then switched to journalism when she got to Wesleyan. But she'd always been a sweet, obedient, overachieving child, and it didn't occur to her. And her mother was adamant. So Brenda never went to college, and she was very, very angry about that. She'd been going with the guy next door for about 3 years. Like her, he was a good kid. They didn't fool around, but after the college episode, Brenda was in a fuck you mood and more or less forced the guy to sleep with her. That very first time, she got pregnant. Again, her mother was adamant. They had to get married. Again, Brenda went along. Within a month, she was walking down the aisle in a white dress her mother made. She was an expert dressmaker. 2 weeks later, after the honeymoon, she had a miscarriage. She hadn't needed to get married at all. The poor slob on the other end of all of this didn't like it any better than Brenda did, so as soon as she could, she filed for divorce. That was the breaking point with her parents because she was the first person in their family who'd ever gotten a divorce. So, from being a wonderful, overachieving, goody two-shoes child, Brenda became overnight an alienated divorcee of 20. She went to work for a tool company as an executive secretary, which seemed like a good gig until she found out the job involved the executives' tools as well as the ones they sold. She quit after having to organize call girls for visiting salesmen and being made to watch them at work so she could give head herself. Today, Dayton is just another struggling city in the Rust Belt. Back then, it had a tremendous industrial base. Frigidaire was there, National Cash Register, General Tire. When it still had jobs and factories, it was a major stop on the entertainment circuit. Comedy and music acts used it as a kind of test market. Showbiz wisdom was that if it went over in Dayton, it would go over anywhere. One of the bigger venues in Dayton, out in a suburb called Kettering, was this place, the Racket Club. By day it was a swim and tennis club. At night it became a supper club with top-flight entertainment. Brenda heard on the grapevine that the maitre d' had had a heart attack. She immediately drove out there and said, "I heard your maitre d' had a heart attack. I want his job." She always had balls, Brenda. They said, "Where have you worked?" She said, "I haven't, but I'm really good with people." They were desperate for somebody to front the place, so they gave her a temporary tryout. She loved it and was really good at it. Her whole life began to center round the nightclub. Major acts came through all the time, including at one point in 1960, Lenny Bruce. He and Brenda became good friends, a platonic relationship according to Brenda. It was one of her friends he fucked, but they'd hung out and had a great time. Lenny recommended Burns and Carlin to the Racket Club, and we got a booking there for August 1960. It was only our second or third engagement after Chicago. When our publicity photos came in, apparently Brenda and her roommate Elaine gave us the once-over. Brenda pointed at me and said, "He's mine." Elaine said, "Jack's mine." Fresh young meat, they called us. Our first night, she caught my eye, and I caught hers. She told me later I reminded her a lot of Lenny, the same body language. After our first show, I went over to her and asked, "What do you do in a town like this?" She said, "Well, you can go out to breakfast, or you can find someone with a stereo and a hi-fi and go home with them." I said, "Do you have a stereo and a hi-fi?" She said, "I do." So she took me home. For 2 weeks, we clicked immediately. Our minds clicked. Our humor clicked. We both had the same thought. This is going to be fun. Then the booking ended and it was time to leave. Brenda said she was in love. I didn't know if I was or not, but I knew it wasn't just another fling on the road, which was what everyone at the club told Brenda after I'd gone. "You're never going to see him again." Burns and Carlin got busy and Brenda had to go into hospital to have her appendix out, so we were both pretty occupied for a while. I knew I did want to see her again, but I couldn't take the plunge because I knew also that if I did, something decisive would happen. I was nervous what that would be, so I did nothing. Meanwhile, Brenda's pining away, thinking her friends in the club were right after all, and she'll never see me again. Finally, I called and we talked, and it was so easy I couldn't figure out why the fuck I hadn't done it before. I was going to be in Chicago on New Year's, so I asked her to come up. She couldn't. I had a couple of things to do around Chicago, but after that, I said I'd drive to Dayton. I gave her a day to expect me. I got delayed for some reason for a couple of days, figuring I'd get there eventually. What I didn't know was that when I didn't show on the first day, Brenda cried all night. And when I didn't show the next day either, she cried all that night too. She was totally heartbroken, thought I was just screwing around with her. By now she was working lunches at the club as well as nights. When I finally got to Dayton a few days late in early January, it happened to be lunchtime. I go to the door and she's seating people, giving them menus, taking orders, and so on, when suddenly she turns around and sees me in the doorway. She drops the menus, runs the entire length of the dining room, jumps into my arms. We go to a motel, and no one sees us for 3 days. We lay in bed. We drank beer. I turned her on to grass for the first time. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. We got married on June 3rd, 1961. We'd met in August of 60. In those 10 months, we'd been together for a total of 5 weeks. But Brenda was itching to get out of Dayton. She'd say, "I don't belong in that family. I don't belong in that town. I think I was probably raised by wolves." So it was into my car, with not much more than her clothes, and back on the road with Burns and Carlin. But for us, there was something different now. We were starting out on our own journey, one that would continue for almost 36 years. We had great adventures, and a lot of them, both with Jack and later when I began working as a single. Being on the road with Brenda wasn't all wonderful. Our car was broken into once and we lost everything we had, which at the time when we were living hand to mouth was devastating. But we never let any of it defeat us. We'd say, "Okay, this is the way it is. We go from here." That's what we did for those years. We went from here. We were a good team, a very good team.